Let's start with this hearing today of hi, everyone. And please, you guys, ask any questions to Dr. Rubin. If you have a question for me regarding public health, I'm not an expert, but maybe I can answer it. But Dr. Rubin, I'm sure, can answer all of your questions. What did you think? Well, I know what you thought because on Threads today, you wrote RFK Jr. is a threat to our public health and national security. He must resign or be fired. Tell us what prompted that post and those feelings.
So this has been a long time coming, actually, because a lot of experts, including myself, prior to RFK Jr. becoming Health and Human Services Secretary, has been saying a lot of anti-vaccine statements for the past 20 years through working with the Children's Health Defense Organization. And he constantly twists and manipulates and cherry picks information to confuse the public about the safety and efficacy of vaccines. So I, along with many other experts, have been talking about this for a while and have been concerned that if he became confirmed, which he is now, he's going to dismantle a lot of our public health initiatives. And so we've been seeing this over the past several months in several instances, from starting out with a federal communications pause on the CDC and FDA for about 3 weeks in January and February. These agencies couldn't give alerts about food recalls, that they couldn't talk to the press, that everything was funneled through him and the people that work under him, to having a measles outbreak in Texas that went uncontrolled, that we don't even have a full case count. There's an estimate that it's 1,400 cases. It's probably a lot more than that because a lot of the cases went undetected in these very tight-knit communities in Texas. A lot of misinformation was being spread. He was questioning whether or not people really needed to get vaccinated with the MMR vaccine, which is the most effective measure. Instead, he was talking about vitamin A as something that people should be focusing on, which people ended up having children hospitalized because of vitamin A toxicity, because it can cause liver damage. The federal health response to that outbreak was slow. In fact, a lot of the funding that came in didn't start in February, started in May, when everything was kind of on the way out. And he starts to tout in a Wall Street Journal post recently, in an op-ed, saying that the CDC had handled that appropriately. They did not. And a lot of that comes from the top, from him dictating all these issues, to this culmination of him firing and having President Trump firing Susan Minares, who was the CDC director for only a few weeks,
Right.
which has been rather concerning how that all transpired. And what we saw in that hearing, where he called Susan Minares a liar, which makes no sense. Even Senator Warren was calling him out on it, saying, how could you call her a liar, and that she would say that she's a liar when you yourself endorsed her as the director of CDC, that President Trump had nominated her for that position. The reality is he thought he could step all over her. He thought that she was weak, but she was actually a very strong, very capable person, and essentially told him, no, I'm not going to rubber stamp what your ACIP is going to say if it goes against the best available science, which
What's the
we all
ACIP?
ACIP is the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. So the way that vaccines are approved is that the FDA initially will come together with an advisory committee. They will make recommendations to the FDA. The FDA will then approve it. It moves on to the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, which is an outside group of experts. It was originally 17 experts in vaccine science that would look at the best available evidence in the clinical trials to say, we recommend it for this particular population. Once those issues are voted upon, if it passes, it goes on to the CDC director to sign it, and then pharmacies and doctors' offices can give those vaccines out, and the health insurers will look at those recommendations and will cover those vaccines based on the CDC's recommendations.
But what did he do to those 17 people? Didn't he get rid of them, or am I
He
hallucinating?
fired all of them.
Right.
And
And
that
who did he replace them with?
He replaced it with initially half the number of members. Most of them were either not experienced, they weren't even immunologists or vaccine scientists or physicians. One of the members, Dr. Levy, is a professor at MIT in operations management, which has nothing to do with vaccines, but he was known to talk during the pandemic about his anti-vaccine views against the COVID vaccine, which curried favor to be on the committee itself. So he's also going to be leading a work group for the COVID-19 vaccine that gives recommendations to ACIP. So he stacked the deck with a lot of people who have no business being there. And it just was reported recently from one of my colleagues over in Massachusetts that he's going to add another 7 members to the committee, many of whom are also having significant conflicts of interest. I believe one of the members, Kirk Millowan, is a pediatric cardiologist who has ties to Kennedy's Children's Health Defense Organization.
Which
So
is an anti-vax organization, as we mentioned earlier. You watched the hearing. I didn't, although I saw clips from it and talked to my colleagues. How do you think he fared in that hearing? He was really beaten up pretty badly by people like, Elizabeth Warren and even Senator Cassidy, who was kind of the deciding vote to confirm him. He's a doctor, right? He's from Louisiana, and he had concerns about RFK Jr. until he met with him personally. Then he decided he got enough assurances that he wasn't going to mess with vaccines or access to vaccines and voted to confirm him. And now it seems like he regrets that decision, doesn't it?
I think he does internally because the way that he questioned RFK Jr. was starting out by saying, well, don't you think that President Trump should get a Nobel Peace Prize for his work with Operation Warp Speed? And then Kennedy says, oh, yeah, I agree with you. And then the rebuttal to that from Senator Cassidy was saying, but then why are you railing against the COVID-19 vaccine and restricting access, which is the seminal piece of Operation Warp Speed that really helped people get through the pandemic in that emergency phase. They poured in a lot of resources to be able to get the COVID-19 vaccine out rather quickly, but also in a safe and effective manner with one of the largest phase 3 clinical trials for vaccine ever with tens of thousands of participants to show how high of an effective vaccine it was at that time before we knew how fast the virus would mutate. People tend to forget how much the science changed in real time as people were suffering through this, which also made it very confusing for the type of messaging that was going on during that time in 2020, 2021.
This might be out of your purview, Dr. Rubin, but somebody was and I actually could probably find out talking to some of my friends who cover politics on Capitol Hill. But one of the questions we got was, what is the point? What was the point of today's Senate hearing? Will this initiate the removal process for RFK Jr.? This person thinks he needs to be fired. Do you think that? I mean, of course, you work in the medical field, and I think people who are in public health are, for the most part, very much opposed to the measures he's taking. But do you think he's at risk of being fired, or is that just not something that you wouldn't know about
Well, I don't have any insider sources to be able to tell you one way
at
or
the
the
White
other.
House?
Right. No. I mean, I do have contacts. Like I have contacts with Senator Warren and a couple other representatives that I've talked to on the side, but there's not any chatter that I've heard personally saying that he's going to get fired immediately. Right. So what we know of the position of Health and Human Services Secretary is the president has to decide to fire him, and Congress has the option to impeach him, and then the Senate can then remove him from office. But that hasn't happened to a Health and Human Services Secretary. There was only one under Trump, I believe. I forgot his name off the top of my head, who was going to potentially be impeached over the fact that he took funds and used them inappropriately. I
Right.
can't remember exactly. You may know the name or somebody in the
I don't
chat
remember
will.
the name, but maybe one of our smart followers will.
Yeah, maybe will, or I can look it up.
Somebody
But
Google who
but
was.
but but it is true that there was one who resigned before potentially getting impeached for using funds improperly, using military planes for personal benefit. It was something very strange like that they left. But only one other cabinet member has really been thrown out of office like over 100 years ago. So it's theoretically a possibility, but it's highly unlikely at this point, given the political climate that we're in, with the Republicans with control of the House and Senate, that they'd impeach and throw him out. And President Trump said on Truth Social that he's like kind of in agreement with him, but I don't think he understands how much RFK is actually tarnishing his potential legacy over Operation Warp Speed. So it's a very confusing time that we're in.
By the way, if you're just joining us, I'm talking with Dr. Zachary Rubin. He's a double board certified pediatrician specializing in allergy treatment and immunology. He practices in the western suburbs of Chicago, and I suggest you all follow him on social media because his insights are invaluable. What are you here? Oh, it's Tom Price. Thank you, Julia, my
Okay.
producer. He was
Thank
the
you.
secretary, and
Yeah.
what you made it disappear, Julia, before I said he resigned in, I think, 2017, she wrote. But
Right.
anyway, what are you hearing from your fellow pediatricians and doctors? And I mean, I want to talk to you also about what's happening at the CDC and what's happening in the state of Florida, because there's stuff happening everywhere. But in general, what are you hearing from your colleagues and your people in your profession about what RFK Jr. is doing overall and the moves he's made as a Secretary of HHS?
The morale in general to my colleagues, including my dad, who's a pediatrician, who we share patients actually, because he practices in the same town. We're all kind of a little down right now with what's been going on because a lot of the rhetoric is not only towards the CDC, but it's towards doctors in general. If you may recall, RFK Jr., one of his initiatives is to require all medical schools to teach nutrition. And the reality is that they already do that. It's not standardized necessarily, and it really comes back to this issue about what is our healthcare system actually able to accomplish in the current system that it's in? For primary care providers to be able to see all the patients that they see and keep the lights on, they can only spend about 15 minutes per patient. So it is really difficult to be able to put in all of those pieces of advice and anticipatory guidance for children and adults and talk about nutrition to a level that will really help people and that's not addressing the underlying systemic issues related to food deserts, to racial inequalities, all these different social determinants of health that have nothing to do with physicians. And it completely ignores the fact that we have colleagues who are specialists in nutrition and registered dietitians that we often lean on to help. So what RFK Jr. tends to do is gaslight the public into thinking that the problem is pointing at the fingers of doctors and healthcare workers rather than looking at the more global systemic issue with access to healthcare, access to safe and nutritious foods. He likes to kind of say it, but he's not really doing anything outside of banning food dyes and then saying we should put beef tallow back in French fries.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many issues with healthcare and so many sort of macro issues, and it seems like he is sort of pulling apart the foundations of public health care. So I know my friend Jessica Nurick is watching too. Nurick rhymes with Couric. Everyone follow Jessica; she's also fantastic. Let me ask you about the CDC. I mean, what a nightmare there. I mean, last week, as you mentioned, the new CDC director, Susan Manaras, was fired after just 29 days on the job. Following her termination, several top CDC officials resigned in protest. It sounds like, and you wrote on a recent Substack essay, that the CDC is unraveling. For people who may not be super well versed in public health, I'd love you to explain why the CDC is what it does and why it's so critically important in terms of public health.
So it's the main public health agency for the country that deals with a lot of different issues that people may not be aware of. We talk about infectious diseases a lot because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and rightfully so. We have to track things like influenza, RSV, and be able to talk to people about that. But what people may not realize is let's say you go to the hospital and you're really sick, and doctors are trying to figure out what's going on, and they're really having a hard time figuring out, and they think there might be an infectious disease going on that they're not quite versed in. They'll talk to the CDC and they may have to send samples to the CDC's headquarters or to one of their labs to run very specialized tests that are at limited resource. And some of those things are going away. Another example is the fact that in Milwaukee, there was a recent lead poisoning outbreak in the Milwaukee Public School District. This was happening right as the Trump administration started to come into power and everything was being cut very quickly. So the experts in lead poisoning were not able to do their job and help folks out there, which lead poisoning is a significant reason why some children will have issues related to intellectual disability, right? This is a toxic metal that older buildings can accumulate. We've been trying to issue, go deal with this. They're also giving education about tobacco and vaping. These are all aspects of everyday life that we take for granted because we don't think about it all the time. But if you look at back in 1965, when RFK Jr. talks about when he was a kid and they didn't see chronic disease, which he's lying about, 42% of people smoked in the United States. Now it's 11%. A lot of that has to do with the education and the outreach that the CDC was providing for us.
You know what? Obviously, it's become incredibly dysfunctional. Talk about low morale. Everything you read, people are devastated. There was that shooting. I mean, these are real public health heroes who are working at the CDC. In the worst case scenario, if you don't have a CDC, I mean, you outlined some of the things that have happened, but if you don't have a fully functioning, thriving, and effective CDC, what happens?
Well, it's going to come to the states to be able to fill the gaps for what the CDC was doing. And many states do not have the proper resources to do all the things that the CDC was doing. The example, as I mentioned earlier, is the measles outbreak that was happening in Texas. And they had very limited resources to be able to combat it. And they were asking help from the CDC. They weren't able to get it. And it prolonged that outbreak that's still actually lingering in different parts of the country because as a virus, it's highly contagious. When you have pockets of under-vaccinated communities, it's going to find a way there, especially when people travel, because we don't just stay within our own state borders. We're a very vast country. So that type of spread would have been potentially prevented if we had a proper CDC response, but they were being hampered by the leadership. And I want to make it very clear, the workers at the CDC, I think, do an incredible job. It's the current leadership that is pulling the strings behind the table, behind closed doors. That's where the problem is with what's going on.
When you say leadership, are you talking about RFK Jr.? Are there other
RFK Jr.
people who
It's
you feel
RFK
are?
Jr. and the people directly underneath him who are calling those specific shots. The now acting CDC director really has no business being there. He's
Oh,
not a physician or public health expert.
it's a guy named Jim O'Neill.
Jim O'Neill, correct?
It breaks sharply with CDC tradition. He's a Bush era HHS official turned Silicon Valley investor. He is neither a physician nor a scientist, an unusual profile for the agency's top post. He's spent, oh God, he spent nearly 2 decades in close partnership with billionaire Peter Thiel, managing his funds, directing the Thiel Foundation, and co-founding the Thiel Fellowship.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not a good alternative to Susan Minara's, that's for certain.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about Florida. Okay, so the CDC is imploding, and now we have the Surgeon General of Florida, Joseph Ladapo. Am I saying Joseph Ladapo's name right?
I thought it was Latipo, but I could be
Okay.
wrong.
Well, then, if you thought it, I'm going to go with that.
Okay.
Ladapo. He
Okay.
announced, obviously, everyone knows this, that the state plans to become the first to eliminate all vaccine mandates, including those for school kids. When you heard this, what was your reaction?
Oh, I've been extremely upset since hearing about it because it's going to kill kids. I'm being very blunt that type of move is going to kill kids and adults. So the success of vaccines, in a sense, are almost its undoing because most of the public have never seen Haemophilus influenzae B or Hib. That's a bacteria that can cause severe meningitis. It can cause epiglottitis, where there's a piece that's called the epiglottis that covers your windpipe, and it can get swollen and kids can suffocate from that. It's very hard to treat that. And we would have thousands of kids dealing with severe Hib as an example prior to that vaccine being developed. There's polio, which a lot of people have probably heard of, but never seen what paralytic polio looks like. Rotavirus was a common virus causing severe diarrhea and dehydration in children that used to fill up pediatric wards back when my dad was a pediatric resident. And now we don't see that anymore. So a lot of these things, me as a younger physician, I've never seen them because vaccines were so successful. But we've already started to see the cracks over the last 5 to 10 years, especially accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic, where people weren't seeing their pediatricians as regularly. The vaccination coverage has been dropping, and now we've had the largest measles outbreak in over 30 years since the early 90s, to the point that 2 kids and an adult died from measles unnecessarily from that. It was declared eliminated back in 2000. I predict in the next 2 to 5 years, if these types of mandates go away, which, by the way, in Florida, it's not completely official. They're talking about policy. They have to legislate it first. But if it actually goes through in 2 to 5 years, we're gonna start seeing polio outbreaks. We're gonna start seeing all of these things coming back. It's just a matter of time when the coverage is gonna start to decrease.
What about those who are kind of anti-vax? I just would love to know, what do you say to people? I'm sure you might get some of them in your practice, Dr. Rubin, who say people should be able to make a decision for themselves. Give me your best case, your best convincing case for making sure children get vaccinated for the good of the public at large.
Right. So I talk about the 4 pillars of medical ethics so that people understand when we make medical decisions, weighing risks and benefits, we actually go to those 4 pillars. Beneficence is giving that patient and the general community something beneficial to make them feel better. Vaccines save lives. They save about 4 million lives for kids in the world each year. It is astounding how well it's dropped. And there are so many resources you can look at from the CDC, from the WHO, from the American Academy of Pediatrics. It all corroborates that type of benefit. Then we have the issue of justice or equity, where we know that healthcare access is limited in some areas in the country, but vaccines level the playing field to be able to protect a community, especially those who can't get vaccinated. There's this concept of herd immunity where if we vaccinate enough people, those who can't get vaccinated will get protected. It's basically a community barrier. Sometimes we call it community immunity. And by lowering that vaccination rate, we are going to end up making those people who need to be protected won't be able to get protected anymore, and they're not going to live in a just society. Then we talk. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Go. No, you go
Yeah.
ahead. I was just gonna mention, sorry to interrupt, that globally vaccination has saved an estimated 154 million lives over the past 50 years, primarily among children under the age of 5. Sorry, continue.
Exactly. No, that's an important point about beneficence. Then we talk about non-malfeasance, do no harm. And if you weigh getting vaccinated and the risks associated with that versus the disease itself, the vaccine has significantly lower risks. I've never said that there's no risks to vaccines. No physician's ever said that. There's always side effects. If something you put in your body is going to have an effect to do something, you're going to expect side effects to happen. Tylenol can cause side effects. Claritin and Benadryl cause side effects, and we take those all the time. Tylenol is one of the leading causes of acute liver damage in this country, and it's just unfettered access for people, right? So vaccines can cause mild symptoms the majority of the time, and there are rare cases of severe reactions that can happen. I'm a pediatric allergist immunologist. Part of my training is seeing adverse reactions to vaccines, and I've seen 2 cases of anaphylaxis to the COVID vaccine. And we worked it up and we dealt with it and figured out what the underlying mechanism of action is. And both those patients actually were able to take subsequent boosters with proper pretreatment. So we understand that these things can happen, but they're very rare, versus getting sick with these infectious diseases can cause severe disability and death.
I know.
That,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
right?
Yes, and
And
I know you must have a lot of patients, or that's an overstatement. You must have some patients who have been diagnosed with autism. Am I right?
absolutely.
And so it's really the community of people who have children. Some of those parents who have children with autism, and that sort of disproven connection between the MMR vaccine and autism that was made by that physician who's now been discredited. He was taking money and
Andrew
uh,
Wakefield, yeah.
yeah, what's his name again? Wakefield.
Andrew Wakefield, yeah.
Right, right. So I think, talk to me about those parents, because my heart goes out to them, because they don't necessarily have answers, and they have a whole group of advocates saying the vaccine caused autism, and then, that's still circulating in the anti-vax community. So how do you talk to those parents who, are trying to figure out why their child is in this situation?
Right. So I will say I'm lucky. It may be because of the community that I'm in or because of my age and where I came into medicine. But in my personal practice, I don't have parents linking those two anymore. That they've actually learned that that's been debunked, thoroughly studied, and they put that to bed. And I always talk about in general with chronic diseases that it is not the parent's fault. It's not the patient's fault that they've been dealing with these things. And when it comes to something like autism spectrum disorder, I'm always reassuring families that we're still learning a lot about what is going on, and we have constantly changed the diagnostic criteria and the way that we manage this to try to help people live healthy, happy lives because, it is along a spectrum at this point. It's a very different diagnostic criteria compared to in the 60s and 70s that RFK Jr. likes to try to inflate this issue of saying, oh, the numbers have exploded. And that's a bit of a hyperbole when the diagnostic criteria have changed to have a wider catchment of people, a very neurodiverse group of people who are special and important and should be accepted rather than stigmatized and used as a political talking point. But as physicians, we're here to support and do the best we can to help them.
Let's talk about Florida a little bit more. I mean, first of all, you know, there's a lot of chatter about people not, you think about tourist attractions like Disney World and Universal Studios and all the places in Florida, not to mention sort of, vacation spots and beaches and all that. Do you think this is going to hurt Florida tourism? And if you were taking a vacation with your children, given sort of this, if this policy or proposal does get voted on by the legislature, would it give you pause to travel there?
Absolutely. I think there are going to be a lot of people who are not going to want to travel there. I actually am supposed to speak at a annual meeting for a medical society in a couple of months. And I'm even debating about whether I'm going to go down there because I don't want to support uh, a state that's going to potentially harm their constituents, to harm children who can't advocate for themselves. And I think it's important that we all make a stand to tell people that this is wrong. That I encourage people who are listening, especially if you live in Florida, but even if you don't, to be talking and saying that this is wrong. This is going to set a bad precedent because my biggest fear is that other states will also do this and it'll become this red blue divide where you're going to have more and more people confused by this. There's going to be much more laxity at schools. It's going to potentially erode our public education system because people aren't going to want to put their kids in public school. This is a big mess that we need to rectify as quickly as possible. So like I mentioned earlier, not all of this is set in stone at this point because the Florida legislator has to I believe Governor DeSantis talked about a broad, like, medical freedom package. They need to say no to that. You can't like, the last point I wanted to make earlier about the 4 pillars of medical
Yeah, sorry.
ethics. That's
I
okay.
went
That's
in.
okay. But this is the most important one, which is patient autonomy. This is the one that has been politicized since the pandemic, talking about, ironically saying, "My body, my choice," in a
That's
vaccine
when it comes
sense.
to reproductive rights, but go
Exactly,
on.
exactly, right. No, 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 I'm glad you said that too, but that slogan for vaccination has been really misused because when you talk about public health, it's for the greater good. You can't live in a free and just society and have all the liberties of it, but then potentially kill someone because you're not vaccinated. So in Florida, what would happen if a child died of polio because of this? Who's going to be at fault for that? Right? Like, that is not something anybody wants to deal with. We don't want children dying of vaccine preventable diseases. And if you're going to be in a public forum at a public school, that's why all the states have mandated this for the greater good.
Right. Well, it's public health, not personal health, right?
Exactly.
And let's talk about sort of immunocompromised people. Kids who might be treated for cancer, or someone from on my platform, social media, said, "How will school districts protect teachers, those who might be pregnant?" Right? It's very dangerous. Some of these diseases to be around kids that aren't vaccinated, and it can have a really detrimental effect on a pregnancy. Right?
Yeah, and I've taken care of kids who have something called primary immunodeficiency diseases. Some people have heard of like the movie Bubble Boy. These are rare diseases where children are born with a non-functional immune system. They can't get vaccinated. So those are kids who are highly susceptible to getting sick. And there are plenty of adults who also have these immune deficiencies, like chronic variable immune deficiency, where they don't, even if they get vaccinated, it doesn't really work that well. And even healthy individuals could end up getting infected as less and less people get vaccinated because that herd immunity goes away. Sometimes the vaccines do not last forever. And so there are also going to be people who do the best they can to stay healthy and will still potentially get sick in rare situations. And that's
Are
all because of these policy decisions that are actively trying to harm people.
and aren't really coming from, well, scientists or doctors who really understand how what a terrible thing this is. I mean, what about kids who are traveling or adults who are traveling from Florida to other states? Could that potentially cause a problem for people?
Absolutely. That's just what happened in Texas with the measles outbreak. The outbreak was centered in West Texas, and then people spread all over the place. And we saw outbreaks in other states that originated from there. These diseases do not know borders. They know people. If there's a person they can infect, they will infect them. If that person travels with a disease like measles, as an example, as an incubation time, meaning the time it takes from getting infected to showing symptoms, can be 21 days. So you could easily go to other places and spread it to communities that are under vaccinated. If there's less than 95% of the population immune by vaccination or infection, you're going to have an outbreak. And that's likely going to happen more and more as time goes on if we continue down this road.
Let me ask a couple of questions that came in. Will insurance companies still cover vaccinations if we choose to have them for our children?
That's an excellent question that is a little bit to be determined depending on where you live. I just found out, it's kind of breaking news, that Massachusetts is the first state now to mandate that the insurance companies have to follow the state public health guidance, not the CDC. So they're going to ensure that vaccinations will be covered that way, which is a unique kind of workaround to that I hope other states will also follow suit, that they'll mandate that their own constituents would be able to get access to it that way. We'll see
But
if
what
other
about in states like Florida? Will insurance cover it?
don't know yet. It's hard to say because they have to go based off of the CDC's recommendations. So if they keep changing it, like September 18th through 19th, there's going to be another ACIP meeting, and they're going to go over some routine vaccinations, hepatitis B, and the measles, mumps, rubella, varicella vaccine, which is, including chickenpox in that. So by them putting that on the meeting agenda, there's a decent chance that they may, not recommend it. If they don't recommend it or say talk with your doctor, insurance companies may not cover it potentially. We don't know. It's still a big unknown.
Why do I feel like I'm trapped in an episode of The Last of Us, Dr. Rubin? This is all so
Or Don't Look Up. Remember the movie Don't Look Up?
yes, yes, but also it just seems like the country is on fire, and then not to mention the world and the impact that the Trump administration is having on international politics. Somebody asked if you could provide an update on what's going on with bird flu.
So right now, there's not too much of a concern currently because bird flu, like all influenza viruses, are pretty meek in the summer, but it's probably going to change soon. But that's the other issue, which is who's going to be tracking this if the CDC has been relatively compromised to this point. I'm not exactly sure yet. I have to look into it. But over the summer, there hasn't been any human cases because it doesn't really transmit well, but we're about to get into cold and flu season very soon.
Okay, so to be determined. Someone asked, should people of all ages be worried about this move from Florida? What should seniors be worried about?
Well, grandparents see their grandkids, and if their grandkids are not vaccinated, they're at risk of potentially getting sick. To anybody who's living there who are elderly, you need to make sure that your family members are still staying up to date on their vaccinations to make sure that your tight knit community is protected.
What is the plan after kids start getting diseases we thought were eradicated?
Well, physicians like me who are younger are going to have to learn on the fly because it's not something that I'm well experienced in because it's been gone for so long. So there's going to be a bit of an adjustment period if it happens. But I hope that we don't have to get to that point. That's my biggest hope. If it does, I think that would be the biggest wake up call finally for legislatures in the White House and everyone to just say, enough's enough. RFK Jr. needs to go.
Yeah, but that's really, playing Russian roulette with children's lives. And,
It's
as
not
much as
appropriate.
people would like to say, I told you so, they don't want to do it at the expense of children who are getting sick, as we've said, from these diseases that you know, were long curable because of vaccines. Someone said, I'm a med student. What should I do to advocate for vaccines and build public trust in them? And I'd like to broaden that question and say, build public trust in science in general, which has been eroding significantly, really, I think, in the last decade.
We need more trusted voices that includes medical students, public health experts, nurses, allied professionals, talking about the benefits of learning about scientific method, learning about critically evaluating the literature, because you hear this trope of do your own research a lot to become skeptical of the establishment. But how do you actually do that research? I think if people understand what it takes to do that, I think they'll have a better appreciation. And I encourage people, whoever's listening, to talk with your friends, talk with your neighbors, see what their perspectives are, and come at it from a place of respect and empathy first and take your time with it. This is a very emotionally charged time in our country, and I think we need to take a step back and try to normalize having conversations where, we may not necessarily agree with each other on certain things, but to be able to move that conversation forward bit by bit, to be able to slowly move that needle in the opposite direction instead of saying, don't trust experts, do this yourself. No, no. You have to be humbled by the fact that experts spend their entire lives. I spent my entire adult life training to become a physician, and now I'm in clinical practice and seeing all of this. I didn't waste all those years to make a quick buck. I did it because I wanted to help people. And that's the general sentiment of the medical community. Because of the pandemic being so politicized, people are swinging the other direction and distrusting experts.
Deborah Spicknell, hi Deborah, said she was worried about smallpox.
That's not likely going to come back. That's been eradicated. That's not the concern they have. We don't vaccinate to smallpox anymore.
Yeah.
The bigger concern would be things like measles, which we're already seeing, polio as an example, Hib, diphtheria, tetanus. It's other diseases that we're more concerned about.
And finally, before I let you go, because you probably had a long day and want to go home to your family, but the question is, how do I obtain my COVID-19 vaccination if it's being banned by the government and not available at places like CVS? And can you just run through like the recommendations? Well, who knows what the recommendations are at this point, but what you're recommending in terms of the COVID vaccine or boosters?
Right. So the American Academy of Pediatrics and the CDC have varying recommendations. What you're basically hearing right now is saying anybody above 65 should get it, and those who have medical conditions should get it. They're not generally recommending it for kids. I'm saying the CDC. My personal recommendation is that COVID-19 still can cause something called long COVID. This is a type of issue that we're still learning about as physicians. I'm seeing this a lot in my practice where people get an infection. It could be mild, and then they have these lingering symptoms that are so variable in its presentation, from a chronic cough that lasts for months
And some
to
really debilitating, right? Some
can be it can cause people to be on disability. Like some people have brain fog, chronic fatigue. They're really not able to function at all. They'll develop something called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or POTS, and they will feel faint every time they get up because their heart is not beating in the proper way that it normally changes when you are changing your position in gravity. So people are getting very sick even if it's a mild case. So because of that, I still recommend that anyone 6 months and older get a yearly booster and then an additional dose for specific populations. Whether you're older, you may need a second dose every year, like every 6 months, but that's still important to help reduce the chances of getting sick or severely sick. And people still die from COVID. Why we still do influenza vaccines every year because tens of thousands of people die from the flu, and COVID's adding on top of that. So I still recommend it for people despite what the CDC is saying.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Zachary Rubin, it's a real privilege and pleasure to meet you. Thank you for all the great work you do communicating science and medical information to the general public in a really accessible, understandable way. I think that's part of the problem. Uh, Doctors and medical professionals need to learn to be better communicators. Obviously, some of them are really good, but I think that, and you're right. I think when people say do your own research, they don't consider the source. They don't have the expertise to put information into context. I really appreciate people with expertise, and I try to feature them when I do these interviews because it's so important for us to talk with somebody who really knows what they're talking about. Like, right? I mean,
Yeah.
duh.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be able to talk with you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I hope this was helpful, everyone. Let us know what you think. Please, interact with me on Substack and tell me other people you'd like me to talk about or things that you want to learn more about. And Dr. Rubin, let's stay in touch because
That's
sadly, I don't think this story is going away.
this is a long road, but I'm going to do whatever I can to help.
Okay. All right. Well, have a good evening. Thanks
You
again.
too. All right.
Okay.
Talk later.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.